Welcome to It's All Mental, a podcast from Everyturn Mental Health. Mental isn't a bad word, there's no health without mental health, and we're here to talk about every high and low, no limits, just good conversation. So this podcast is talking about ADHD. So we're going to focus on that a little bit, and I think we're going to focus really about adults getting diagnosed later on for lots of different reasons. I work for Everyturn Mental Health, but my daughter's been diagnosed with ADHD, and then I started to look at the symptoms and really question my own experiences, and also years of sort of being diagnosed with other mental health conditions, which has got me interested in this topic really. So fortunately, we've got some experts on this topic really. So yeah, can you just introduce yourself, David, and just tell us a little bit about why you're here?
Hello. Well, I'm 46. I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm talking about how it affects, your mental health. How having it might, especially undiagnosed, how it can affect you. And I guess I'm going to be discussing what happens if you actually manage to get some treatment and how things can change moving forward.
Thank you, David, and we do appreciate it. Melanie?
Hi, so I'm Melanie Walters. I've worked professionally with neurodiversity, in particular autism and ADHD, for many years. I've got also personal experience with autism and ADHD, so I come from a very neurodiverse family, so supported it that way for many years. And also, like yourself, Martha, I've had conditions that I've been sort of diagnosed with for many years, and absolutely know now what it probably was.
Yeah.
I'm undiagnosed, but yeah, certainly have many of the traits.
Yeah, and it's always interesting, isn't it? An interesting journey, I think, to go down this path in adulthood. So I suppose starting with you, David, really taking us back a little bit to sort of before you've got your diagnosis, but what were some of the things that you were struggling with? What were some of the challenges you were facing that didn't make sense to you then?
Well, there's many challenges, unfortunately, especially with being undiagnosed. I think the biggest challenge comes from being undiagnosed, because if you don't know what causes you problems, then that in itself is part of the problem. So knowing you have ADHD is really such an important piece of information. But in general, I would feel restless. I wouldn't feel comfortable sitting still. I would never get any enjoyment, for example, of sitting on the beach reading a book. I just wouldn't feel like I could relax. I'd often find that when I would try and read something, especially if it wasn't something that I was particularly bothered about, that I would find myself rereading it countless numbers of times.
We're laughing and nodding, Melanie, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Poor timekeeping, not deliberate. You just don't seem to have a good sense of time. Organizational skills, forget it. You do get good at organizing to a point, but only if you develop some sort of system of how you do things, such as I would always lose my car keys or my glasses, so I would then put them back in the same place all the time, because I knew that I would lose stuff. But then there's other days I'd forget to check my calendar, or if I'd got a meeting, or if I was due to do something or something like that. So organizational skills can be a bit of a problem. And when you're not really interested in something, getting motivated to do something can be a challenge, and sometimes a bit like, oh, how can I turn this? I think I used to term it dragging myself across glass, literally, to do something that I really didn't want to do. I would often delay tasks, procrastinating, especially if they were complicated, because it's really hard to get started with things, and you can feel like you're getting overwhelmed because of the size of what's in front of you. And I've touched on, like remembering things as part of organization, but really having a bit of a deficit with working memory. I mean, it's almost as if you get told a couple of things and then somebody else puts something in there, then you've just lost whatever it was before, and you literally can't remember you had it. It's just gone. So that's one of the problem. Maintaining friendships in particular, I found difficult because I don't know. It's almost like if people aren't directly in your life all the time, it's almost they don't exist anymore. That's what it was like for me anyway before receiving medication for ADHD, I should say. It gets harder and harder for me to remember what it was like before I had medication because it's not as fresh in my memory anymore. You're talking about 9 months ago for me at this point. So it gets, and I still sort of remember, but you get used to your new way of being, if you understand.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But certainly relationships is a problem, and this probably is the worst one, and this is leaving things for the absolute last minute, and because that's the zone when you get stuff done, and the amount of stress that causes you, it can be horrific because it causes you to be sleepless and anxious, and you go through this whole motion of working at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and then you might somehow manage to achieve what you wanted to achieve, and then you crash and burn after that. So I mean that's just sort of some of the functional stuff. I mean, I've probably forgotten some of the other aspects, and I know
I mean, there's so many, isn't there? And since I've been learning about it, I'm just like, and then once you start learning about it, and you can see yourself, I can see myself in so many of the things that you described, and things like you say, leaving it to last minute, even when you try not to. Somehow you have, like, it's like, I don't know why I haven't done this. And then it's those feelings of really feeling frustrated with yourself. I think that is hard to manage. And sort of the feelings around it are difficult, I think, in terms of not being able to cope like everybody else is how I've always felt.
That kind of brings me on to the second element of being undiagnosed, untreated for ADHD. Because you can be really frustrated as a person. You can be very angry as a person. I distinctly remember feeling inadequate. I mean, I still do, to be honest, sometimes. Failure, feeling disappointed in yourself. The feeling that there's always a dark cloud above you, and it's just not a good feeling to have, and just generally having a low mood and just being anxious all the time, and then never really being able to put your finger on the why. And it's just not a nice place to be. And if you at the very least knew what you had and what the problem was, you could maybe logic it out and put things in place to help yourself.
So what was one of the sort of, the light bulb moment I think a lot of adults are experiencing? What was that light bulb moment like for you? And did you go then straight away to get an assessment? Did you leave it for a period of time, or what was your experience around that?
Well, it was really quite bizarre because I found myself death scrolling through YouTube on my TV. We all get our YouTube feeds, and when someone with ADHD is putting a task off, which we do, we can find ourselves scrolling through text messages, videos, and all sorts of stuff for hours and hours on end. And literally a news video came up. Oh, watch that news video. There was a bit in it to do with ADHD, and the way that I can't quite remember what was said, but the way that the person described it, I sort of pulled a face, and I was like, that sounds really familiar. This is odd. And having ADHD as I do, you become very focused on something that interests you, and then you go off on this massive tangent to understand everything about it. And even though I did that for several weeks, probably by that point, it still took me quite a long time to even go and speak to a GP. And the GP immediately tried to offer me antidepressants, which I wasn't very happy about because I felt like I knew more than what the GP knew at that point, which turns out I did. So yeah.
Yeah. I know the feeling, and I think it's difficult because I think I'm in that position at the moment, and I went to a conference around ADHD in women and girls, specifically, and they were talking about the relationships around hormones, and everything they were saying just made so much sense to me around that change throughout the cycle and how it affects women differently, which obviously we're not going to go into all that here, but I think it's just interesting when you start to find these things out, and it starts to make so much sense as well. So when you got your diagnosis, how was that feeling? Was it sort of relief, anger, a bit of everything?
I kind of realized that the way I viewed myself had never been fair. I think you look almost down on yourself because you can see others around you that seem to be able to do things that you can't, and I felt like I was one of the people in the room that was probably cleverer than the next, and I was never able to leverage that because of having that issue, and I always felt really down on myself because I had this unknown disability. And once I was diagnosed, I mean, it was like I could give myself a break. I could sort of start to let things go. I mean, you don't like that. You've lost lots of time. You could argue in some ways you feel like you've wasted your life because you could have been something else. I don't know. But you've got to just learn to live with that because it is what it is. And there's no point in dwelling on what you can't change.
No. And it's difficult, isn't it? And like you say, a lot of people are going through that as well. And yeah, it's but for our children, hopefully this awareness is helping the next generation not have to go through this and get the support they need earlier.
Well, just interjecting on that point, you're absolutely right. But now I feel anxious because I do have children and I am really struggling against the system that really wants to be resistant.
Yeah, it does.
So that in itself will cause lots of people with ADHD, who they themselves have children with ADHD, lots of problems and anxiety and stress.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that could be a whole other topic, really,
Yeah,
couldn't it? And I'm sure, Melanie,
yeah.
you know a lot around this. I'm just going to ask you just quickly about your experience with medication, because I know there's been lots of different, people's experiences and how they get on with it. How have you found it?
My experience is that my struggles reduced notably. Symptoms improved massively, virtually straight away. And as time goes on, more so. One thing that you don't get when you first start taking medication is to unlearn the behaviors that you previously had. That takes time to sort of do things differently because your life experience and how you functions made you who you are. So the medication sort of remakes you in a way, and I'm not there yet. I know that I'm not my finished person who I think I might end up one day being, and that might take many years. But being able to manage my life, my workload, my finances, that comes with its own stress because now I don't feel like I've got an excuse, which was nice to have before. And the medication helped me ask for counselling once I started taking it because I very quickly realised that, well, I mean, it's wrong to say my life had been a bit of a dumpster fire because that's just not true. But it's your own perception of, you can just see like your life's been a bit of a train wreck, but maybe it's not as bad as I like to think it is. I'm sure other people have had a much worse time than me, but yeah, so it's really having the ability to concentrate and focus, and it does change your personality and how you are moving forward. I mean, I was working with a colleague the other day, and they remarked at me, "You're really chilled these days." And I went, "Yeah, I know." And I can sit in the garden, look at the sky, I can just look at the clouds, and I can just relax. And that is something that I never had, and that is amazing. Just being able to sit still and relax. And you know, maybe I'm still a little bit restless, but you're talking that it's gone from really high to so low. It's not really that a problem to me anymore. Not that even my working memory's improved.
It's amazing, isn't it? That's obvious.
It is,
that, that it's something.
I think I mean, part of the reason why I wanted to do this conversation is because I really hope other people who can make a difference would see something like this and think, actually, why is this system the way it is that's preventing people from getting the help that they need? Because people with ADHD, we do have what some people term superpowers, in that we're really good at spotting patterns in things, where when we get focused on things, actually the medication can make focus even stronger. That's both a good thing and a bad thing, I've found. But we think out of the box. So treating people with ADHD, in my mind, it saves the economy money. It saves the economy money in two ways. One, because that person's far more productive than they ever was before. They are more inventive than your atypical person, so they're adding value to the economy. Perhaps they're not, on the GP's, door every 5 seconds because they've got some mental health issue or some other unrelated health issue because they haven't looked after themselves. I mean, I eat considerably better than I ever used to. I've lost 2 stone in weight since, finding out I've got ADHD and being on the medication. I feel far, far better. I exercise regularly now. I really didn't before. So there's just so many benefits, and
yeah,
I think
definitely.
I don't really understand, and I'm probably going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I don't understand why GPs can prescribe antidepressants for a mental health condition, which is probably biological partly, but for a biological issue such as ADHD, just because of the class of the drug, they can't prescribe for it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's mainly a questionnaire that someone gets asked for ADHD. How's it that different than talking to someone about depression? Why does it have to be this big process that
no, I absolutely
really
agree with you. And like you say, people are getting the wrong, they're accessing mental health services. If you deal with the underlying reasons that people are getting these mental health conditions, it's going to make it. No, I absolutely think you're right, David.
It would save the UK economy potential money by treating people. It would generate more wealth for the country, and all those services that are problematic, you would take the strain away from them. And I think people just look at things sometimes and just think, well, this is an extra burden, and maybe they don't realize that actually you deal with that burden, all those other burdens disappear, because there's potentially up to 1 in 10 people, or maybe, I don't know, I think some statisticians suggest it's more like not 1 in 10 people. It's probably about 4% of the population, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really valid point.
I'm hoping that's something that's going to get better. I mean, I always think back, when you look back, we never got help with mental health conditions at one time. You just wouldn't say, you'd sort of suffer. And I feel like now all of a sudden we're able to get help with anxiety, depression, addiction, and all of those things. But it's as if now we're understanding that actually often the root cause to that is ADHD, and I've worked with a lot of adults that actually, when you look at it, that addiction is that dopamine fix, and and it's that co-occurring condition. But I think there's still a stigma, although the stigma's gone a lot more to be diagnosed. It's as if with sometimes it's as if, right, okay, it's ADHD, there you go, we'll still treat you for depression and addiction and all of those things, but the end behaviour. And if we can get underneath and make everything, those little things better and those small challenges. And I think that's the thing, you know, often that people with ADHD can really succeed well. You know, they can go through life, be high achievers and like have that focus. But then it's that sort of dip. I always say it's a bit like a roller coaster. It's that dip of, yes, achieving. And then it's as if you're going on that high, the dopamine fix is there, you can't come off it. And then all of a sudden it goes on that down. And it's actually just trying to sort of treat those and treat the small things behind it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And with your work, Melanie, like supporting adults, do you think it's a lot more common that people are kind of coming forward? Is this something that you're seeing a lot more of, adults realising?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think it's starting to look. And I think the problem is, especially with adults as well, is you've masked for so long. And as David said, you know, and I would say exactly the same. It's took me 52 years to find that toolkit to be able to get through life and do all of those little things. And some of that toolkit is amazing and it's brilliant, but some of it is not. It's negative, and that's where you get those co-occurring conditions that aren't as good for your well-being. And I think now it's people then looking back, because when you've masked it for so long and when it's become, that's just me, that's the way I do things, you know I live on stress, or I did do at one time. So if I got lots of things on, everything was like, yeah, I'll do this, I'll plan this, I'll plan this, I'll plan. And that's how it was all the time, and everything had to be perfect. And it's that thing of that's not the best thing for you all the time, but it was me. It's as if that was my personality. And so it's then getting used to that's what it is, that's what you do. And as David said, you know, again, there's probably loads of other things under there, but it's not realizing, because you've just got on with it, you just do it. And I think the first thing to do is to actually, you know, as soon as you start sort of seeing those little things, as you're questioning now, Martha, you start to look at, okay, what can I do to get from A to B and make that a little easier for myself, rather
like
than
you
just
say, you've
putting
done
up
things.
with it.
You've done things for so long in a certain way or a certain guise, you know, and I think there is an element. And when you talked about your personality, David, and it changing, there is a little bit that, you know, that restlessness, that scattiness, that sort of way of it being is who you are. And you think, well, who would I be without that? You know, why would people see me without that? Because in a way it becomes quite amusing, really, in some ways, to everyone around you. Sometimes not as amusing to me, but everything I seem to do is chaotic, you know what I mean? And it's like it's interesting to think that there's another reason for that. Do you think there's some misconceptions about ADHD at the moment, Melanie? Do you think it's getting some bad press and making it difficult?
There's lots of them, and I think there's so much out there. And I think the problem is that everybody is very, very different. And so not one person is the same. And you know, I know if we sat and spoke, we'd probably all, you know, we've been nodding our heads and things, but then there's elements that aren't the same. And I think, I don't know, some of those misconceptions is that it's very visible, that you're going to see it, that it is going to be chaotic, but sometimes that chaos is underneath. Rather than, you know, and on the surface, some people can appear that, yes, they're just a bit lively, or they're, you know, maybe not got that quite that concentration. I don't know, might be a bit lazy, all of those little things, but sometimes it's underneath the surface that the real problems are. And it's what those small everyday challenges then often build up to something huge. And I think it's a bit like, you know, they say the swan with the legs going underwater, and it is, and it's that brain that never stops, that brain trying to focus on one train of thought, and it, you know, I think that's the things that it's not visible, and people can still achieve. As I know, you know, so many people that have, and it's those things that I don't know, that's just, everybody thinks they're going to notice it, and they're not.
You've just helped me remember, Melanie, that before medication, I would start a task. I would think about something else. I would then do that task and then go, oh, I need to do that thing. And then I'd be there. And I'd end up spending my entire day working really hard and achieving absolutely nothing.
Absolutely.
And because I couldn't remember where I was at, I probably ended up doing all the work again, over and over again.
I said it's a bit like climbing a hill of sand. That's how I felt. I feel sometimes it's like I'm trying so hard. I'm like I'm working so hard. I'm constantly going, but I'm still not getting anywhere. It's
and it's that flicking from one to another, isn't it? It's that thing. It is as if everything's working okay in there, and like we've said before, some things work really, really well, but it's as if they can't quite connect all the jobs together to make that one goal. And I think that's the difficulty, that if you look sometimes at the end of the day of all the fantastic things that you've either started or the ideas you've got. I often say, I'm very much, as soon as I wake up in the morning, no matter what time it is, I'll have done a day's work before I've actually got out of bed, because my brain goes, oh right, I'll do this, and I'm exhausted before I've got out of bed. And so I think it's that hidden side to it that possibly we don't recognize as much.
Definitely. So do you think that there are more adults reaching out for a diagnosis? How does that look? What kind of support is there for adults that get a diagnosis? And do you see huge gaps, or what's your experience of that?
I think there is still huge gaps within adults, and with every part of it. I think there are huge gaps, but I think also it's reaching out for that support as well. There are ADHD coaches, and I think again we still reach out for those, that anxiety, that depression, and it's easier to do that than it seems to be, because it is a huge challenge. It is small steps, and I think the first step is to really ask ourselves who we are. And what do we like? What is our energy levels? What makes our battery energize? What burns it out? And being able to adjust our life to meet our needs, instead of life, having to adjust our needs to meet life, if that makes sense. And I think that in some ways it's also getting that support and getting the correct support. So going underneath for the ADHD sport specifically, to get to that root cause.
It kind of answers. I was going to ask sort of what, if someone was listening that suspects they've got ADHD, then what would be their next steps? But I think we've sort of answered that, really, haven't we? With, David, obviously you saying get the diagnosis. I know that there's a right to choose for adults in the UK as well, which I didn't realise. So you can send your GP to be referred to any different organisation that will do a diagnosis. So if look up right to choose for people that are interested. So I suppose sort of rounding it off a little bit, we've got about 20-minute podcast, but what's something that's really helped you, David? Like what advice could you give to people?
Talk about it. That's the absolute biggest thing. Tell other people about it that you think also have the issue, because helping other people when you yourself never got any help, that gives you something back. In a way, it's rewarding to actually be able to say to somebody, have you ever considered that you might have this? Because when you have undiagnosed ADHD, you've never known anything else. You've lived your entire life that way, and until somebody says to you, have you ever thought that you might have this issue because you're doing this, that, and the other, and do you do this? So talking about it, I would say, is the most helpful thing you can do, because when you talk to other people about it, then you can understand yourself better as well, in a way. So yeah. I do have frustrations, though. I've got to admit, the access to work thing. When you have ADHD, you have problems organising yourself and sometimes getting things done. Little things such as getting an ADHD coach, you could really do with someone buddying up with you to help you fill that paperwork in, so you get that help. Because even as of today, I still haven't done what I could have done already, because I just think to it, I've got other things I want to do, but when really that's something I could have done to maybe access someone like Melanie who could, you know, be helpful to me in ways that I've not thought about. So there is a distinct lack of support.
Yeah, no, I think there is a very long way to go. And I spoke to my GP about my contraceptive pill and the hormones, and I felt that it was affecting me. And I said, and I think I've got ADHD, and I think that the hormones might be doing this. And he said, that isn't right. It's a neurological condition. It's not to do with your hormones. It wouldn't matter. And I thought, I know that's not true.
Yeah.
I literally know that's not true. So I had to tell him about it, that I've just been on a conference with doctors around the world that are doing this research, but there's which was quite nice, actually. I'm not just making this up. I actually do know what I'm saying.
Which just goes to prove that GPs are good at looking at many things, but in actual fact, they're not good at any specific thing. And you can't, they're fallible, just like any other person in any other occupation. They don't know everything.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
And sometimes you have to push it, don't you?
You've got to, as a patient, you've got to have reasonable expectations of your GP. And I think people just think that, you know, you speak to your GP and then they will get it right, but that's not really true. They do get it wrong sometimes, not all the time, hopefully, but sometimes.
Yeah, well, they have specialisms, don't they?
Yeah.
So I suppose from you, Melanie, what's your sort of final thoughts on this? What would you like to say to anyone that suspects, or, you know, what do you think the world should understand better about ADHD?
I think for me, it's kind of whether you want a diagnosis, whether you don't want a diagnosis. If you've got those traits that are hindering your day and that making your day more challenging, I think I would really look at how you can make your day better, how you can adjust the things that you do to meet your needs better. And they can be really tiny things, and I would always start with a little tiny thing. So if it's getting dressed in the morning, you know, how can you do that better to fit yourself? How can you prepare for that? How can you set your clothes up? And you know, all of those little things, make sure that everything's easily accessible, such as your keys, if that's your challenge, and just take one thing at a time and set routines, set reminders. But it's going to be habit forming, so it's really just starting those little tiny bits to form those habits. And it's going to take a lot longer because those executive functioning skills possibly aren't as strong, but they can build, and it can be life-changing as we just take each little bit and help that. And that's even if you're on medication, you know, having those strategies underneath are going to give that sort of that good foundation for everything else that's above it. And then I think it's sort of the other thing I would say is as David said earlier on, that his personality's changed. But I think the way I see that a little bit is his personality before being a little bit, you know, hyper and you know, all of those things were not necessarily his personality, but that was the ADHD. And actually, once we've calmed that, you're probably seeing a lot more of the actual personality. And I think that's where we can give ourselves a break a little bit, that you know, as we've said, we do all laugh about our little traits and whatever, but you know, it is they are those traits. And give ourselves a break for doing things a different way around. It's fine to do things. We all get to the same place. You know, let's do it in the way round that fits us.
Lovely. That's brilliant. And thank you both so much for being a part of this discussion. So thank you for listening to It's All Mental, a podcast from Everyturn Mental Health. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to follow, rate and share. See you next time.